Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. I am John Schmeelk. Really excited to be joined today by the one and only Bucky Brooks from NFL Network. You hear him as one of the hosts of the Move the Sticks podcast, was part of the NFL Network's draft coverage over the weekend, NFL.com, Path to the Draft, you name it. He is Mr. Draft, former NFL scout, Bucky Brooks. Bucky, how are you, man?
Man, I'm so good. Thanks for having me on, John. I'm excited.
Yeah, always happy to talk to you around draft time, man. I think usually we get you before the draft, and I'm actually more excited to talk to you now after the draft. As we were chatting before we started, it's one thing to project. It's one thing to now see how these guys fit on the team after they're drafted. When you were a scout and you were traveling, and once you got the guys on the roster, how did that kind of change your mindset and how you thought about the players in context?
Well, once they become our players, then everyone has to love our players. And, one of the things that you try and do is whether you were strongly for the player that you got or you didn't feel quite as strongly, now that he's on the team, hey, let's evaluate how he fits within the fabric of the team. Let's see where he can grow and how he can help us. What are the best things that we can do to put him in a position to succeed? All of those things are in play. And then as a scout, your job is to consistently evaluate him along the way. So what did he look like before the draft may be different than what he looked like in mini camps and OTAs. Let's monitor his progress throughout training camp. And then over the course of the season, every quarter of the season, you kind of do a new write-up on the player. And so let's look at how he grows with us and what are the things that we can do to help him become the best player that he can for our squad.
Now, we were very much in agreement. I would look back at your top fives, which you can find on NFL.com during every draft process. Bucky does a great job detailing them. He kind of splits them up, not just positions. He has like wide receiver. He has slot, and he kind of nickels, outside corner, and he separates the guys by position, which I think is important because they are very defined roles these days. And much like I did, Bucky, you had Reese ranked as an off-ball linebacker because if you watch his tape at Ohio State, guess what? That's what he did best. So now that you see him on the Giants, what is it about that fit that you like?
I just absolutely love it. I love what they potentially can put together with that front seven. One, the player is fantastic. Like, it doesn't take long to pop on the tape at Ohio State to see that he was the designated playmaker of that defense along the front seven. They would use him as off-ball linebacker. Down passing downs, they would put him on the edges and let him create chaos as a pass rusher. And then against elite quarterbacks that ran around, they would have him spy and track the quarterback. When you think about his versatility and the athleticism that he brings, he is the perfect neutralizer for what is prominent within the division. And I think people have to understand when you're building your team, you build your team first to win a division before you can think about taking over the league. And two of the quarterbacks in that division, actually all three of them, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, all are mobile athletes that can make things happen. You now have given Denard Wilson the flexibility to attack the opponent in a few different ways. I love it because, look, he has so much upside and so much potential. When he settles in first the off-ball linebacker, they're going to throw some responsibilities on him to be a pass rusher. He could be a game changer on a defense that already features pass rushers such as Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Abdul Carter. It's going to be a headache to deal with that defense.
Did you feel like when you were looking at Reese as an off-ball linebacker, like you were scouting a linebacker back when you played, Bucky? Because they don't really make linebackers that are 6'4", 240. And look, he's going to put 10, 15 pounds on in the NFL in about 2 years. Like, it's not going to be hard for him with his frame. They just don't build linebackers that size anymore.
No, they don't build prospects like that. Like, you just talking about an elite prospect. And I know there's a lot of conversation about the differences between him and Sonny Styles. And I would say that when you look at the two of them, the difference between Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles is Arvell Reese is a legitimate pass rusher. You legitimately could put him on the edge and he could get after it. He's a freak athlete off the ball because he can run and chase with the best of them. And then the part that I say is under discussed, the violence and the physicality that he plays with. Like, when you watch him play, you feel his presence on that defense. You feel the impact that he makes, and the plays that he made early in the year set up the other guys to be able to make plays later in the year because you had to pay attention to him. He's a nice fit, and he is an old school linebacker because there's so many different things. You can see him walk up on the tight end, put his hands on him. You can see him go to the other side and be the weak backer and chase. I just think he's uniquely qualified for the role. And in that defense, we talk about Tremaine Edmonds coming on board with the guys that I already mentioned, they could have a lot of fun kind of playing a different style of defense.
All right, you went exactly where I wanted you to go, Bucky, because I do think his ability to take on blocks, get his arms extended and shed. They pulled tight ends in him when he was on the edge a bunch of times, and he just did not let the guys block him, which I think is, you don't see that as much from tight ends and from linebackers anymore. Losing Dexter Lawrence now, defensive tackle, having two linebackers with that size and length, with him and Edmonds now side by side. Obviously, you're not going to replace Dexter Lawrence. He's a unique talent, and losing him is never a good thing. But is it more imperative to have linebackers with that take-on ability and size if you're not going to have that monstrous nose tackle occupying those offensive linemen in front of those two bigger linebackers?
Look, I think I'm still hopeful that there's someone that can come in and do some of the dirty work that Dexter Lawrence did.
So are we, by the way. We agree.
Yeah, I would say that the two linebackers that you have in the box are certainly capable of being able to take on blocks and shed and disengage and make plays. In a perfect world, you want those guys to run free and clear. And there's some things that Denard would do to create opportunities for them. It may be more of a movement-based front as opposed to a plug and two gap and do those things. But here's what I'll say is the most important part, since you brought up Dexter. I think it's most important that John Harbaugh in his first year make sure that he has everyone in the locker room that believes in whatever is being talked about. And I love Dexter having a personal relationship with him, but the culture is the culture. And if everyone isn't fit for the culture, then they have to be removed. And what I believe they've started to assemble are what we call Giants types of guys. Meaning when I look at this draft from top to bottom, the identity is there, is clear and apparent that the Giants want to get back to being the Giants. And the conversation that I had years ago with Jerry Reese, and he told me something that George Young told him when he was a young scout. He said, we're called the Giants for a reason. This is a game that is dominated by big men. And when you're the Giants, we always need to be bigger, faster, stronger than the opponent. I think when you look at this draft class and look at the people that they assembled, somebody got their word back to John Harbaugh and Joe Schoen because they certainly look like an old school Giants team.
Well, and Bucky, look, I was going to ask you about identity, and you just answered the question. I think it goes back to what John Harbaugh had in Baltimore, right? When I talk to people around the league, they always said after you played the Ravens, after you played the Steelers, you felt differently. You were maybe sore for an extra day, right? If you talk to the players with the physicality they brought. I think recent linebacker, now we'll talk about Maui guard. I think it just lends to the type of physicality and team that you're talking about in Giants tradition, but also that John Harbaugh had in Baltimore, and they had in the AFC North with the Ravens and the Steelers and those types of teams.
You know, biggest compliment that opponents can pay you is when they look at the schedule, they're like, oh, it's Giants week.
Yeah.
Because they know they already know what they're up against. And one of the things that you talk about with the Baltimore Ravens, you and I can close our eyes and say, hey, man, we know exactly the Ravens are coming into town. We know what kind of game it's going to be. Oh, that guy looks like a Raven. Well, we know exactly what that embodies. Well, the Giants now have a profile where you're beginning to understand what it means to be a Giant. Like the physicality, the toughness, the edginess that comes along with it, the competitiveness. And I think that starts at the top. And look, I'm not going to diminish Joe Schoen's role because Joe and I worked together in Carolina. We were part of a team that built a Super Bowl team and Super Bowl 38. So we understand what it feels like, what it looks like. But I do think collaboratively, collectively, they have certainly got together to put the kind of team that people in New York are very familiar with when you think about the glory days and when the Giants have won. This team begins to have that feel of those teams that won under Coughlin and that won up under Bill Parcells.
Huddle up, get in here. If you're lined up here, you gotta go over the middle with it to score.
Right. How do we make that happen?
I don't know, but Citizens does.
Make sense of your money with Citizens, official bank of Eli Manning.
Hey, Bill, Tom Coughlin always used to tell me, John, big men win football games, and you have to be big. And there's no doubt. Let's go to Francis Maui because I think he checks the box, right? And the Giants' offensive line was better last year. They had a hole at right guard. And I do think, though, they maybe lack that really physical tone setter on the offensive line. And, man, Maui at that size, Bucky, move it into guard. To me, that is your ideal road grading, move the defender from point A to point B against his will type of interior lineman that any team that wants to have a physical run game has to have.
Absolutely. And look, I love that they've already clearly defined his role, but it said he's going to start at right guard right away. When you watched him on tape at Miami, it was about the physicality and toughness. He was a mauler brawler who moved defenders off the ball. He finished with violence. He finished with the kind of feistiness that you like to see. And as I think about the Giants' offensive line and how they're remaking that offensive line, there is some nastiness that kind of permeates everyone that plays there. And I think that is important because we talk about playing big boy football down the stretch, and you're having to deal with the Commanders and the Eagles and the Cowboys. Look, it's a big boy pad game. You put your mouthpiece in, you understand what it is, and he certainly fits the profile that the Giants were aiming for.
And I want to just talk about the offense generally because I think you just kind of hit it. They brought in an interesting combination of offensive coaches to kind of put this offense together. And we know John Harbaugh, as someone that's into every detail on his team, is going to have a big hand in this as well. But he brings in Matt Nagy, who is kind of that shotgun spread, RPO type of system. Greg Roman, obviously, is more of your downhill physical run game type guy. And then Callahan comes from that McVay type of tree, right? How do you think when this all comes together, is it going to look like Andy Reid? Is it going to look like Harbaugh in Baltimore, which tells you more Greg Roman? What do you think this offense is going to look and feel like when we get to the end of training camp?
I think it had bits and pieces of all those elements. It's interesting that you bring all that together. So one thing, let's talk about Callahan first. Callahan's dad was outstanding line coach. He was the O-line coach and eventually the offensive coordinator when I was there in Oakland. He has a reputation for understanding. Look, Brian's not going to stray too far from that when it comes to understanding offense and how it goes. You think about Matt Nagy spending a long time with Andy Reid and how Andy Reid operates. And even though it has been a pass-first premise for Andy Reid throughout it, he does believe in a bit of a physical playing style in terms of how they get their team ready to play. And then in Greg Roman, I think you talk about the creative physicality that his teams typically show. And the creative part is multiple tight end sets, how they get to the running game, the variety of runs that they will show you. But there's no doubt they're going to run the football at you. I think what they'll do is kind of a hodgepodge of all those things. Once they look at the team and look at the strengths of the team, okay, who are our running backs? Who's the quarterback? What does the quarterback do well? Because it has to fit what the quarterback does well while also fitting the overarching plan that John Harbaugh has for his team. But I think it'll be a physical team, but they're still going to toss it around. They may operate at the shotgun some because remember, John Harbaugh saw Lamar Jackson have a lot of success in the shotgun and they were still able to run the ball. Jackson Dart is a runner. He can run. You want to utilize that within reason, but allow him to throw RPOs and those things. So it'd probably be a hodgepodge, mix a bunch of different things.
Giants Huddle Podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From game day celebrations to your everyday financial needs, Big Blue fans get the most out of every moment. With Citizens, learn more at citizensbank.com/Giants. I'll get to Dar in a second, Bucky, but I think you hit it with how you get to the run game. They sign Isaiah Likely in the offseason, but I also think the drafting of Malachi Fields could be a factor here too. And we'll talk about how they use him in a pass game in a second. But his ability as a blocker, I think of how the Rams use Robert Woods, right? How they use Cooper Kupp as a blocker in the slot where you're in 11, but it really plays like 12 because of his ability as a blocker. How do you think Fields now fits into that Likely, Theo Johnson, Patrick Carr's now there as a fullback in terms of how they get to that run game? Not just with the running back, but to your point also with the quarterback in the read option game.
Yeah, no. So I think it's interesting that you brought up Theo Johnson and Isaiah Likely because they're big parts of it, right? The flexibility within their 12 personnel package where they could be in 12 and play like 11. And then you talked about 11 playing like 12 with Malachi Fields being on the field. The thing about Malachi Fields, I think everyone needs to go back to the Senior Bowl. If you go back and read the clips right after the Senior Bowl, people were touting him as a first-round pick. And it cooled for whatever reason after the combine based on maybe how fast he ran or any of those things. But if you watch him play first at Virginia, then at Notre Dame, you felt his presence on the perimeter. To me, he's a guy who is a natural X receiver who showed flashes of being able to be a number one. In the role, obviously, Malik Neighbors is your number one, but he could be a guy that really helps them. In my mind, I think more Amani Toomer and how Amani Toomer complemented Plax and some of the other guys that played on the opposite side. Steady Eddie, chain mover, big time production, but also very involved in the run game. I would expect Malachi Fields to kind of play in that role.
I got a couple different comms for him that people have given me that I like. I think Michael Pittman was an interesting one
That's a really
as
good
a
one.
big guy who's a possession guy. Alshon Jeffrey, if you want to go back a little further, as like a ball winner without great speed on the outside. I looked at your write-up of him. You have him listed as kind of as that X receiver, that ISO receiver that's going on the sideline. But do you also think he can be used as kind of like a possession guy in the middle of the field too, using that frame and that length to catch some of those third and shorts and third and mediums?
Look, I thought he was really good. And by putting him in an X, I think it's a compliment because a lot of times people
Yeah.
will use the X to anchor the passing game. When I watched him at Notre Dame and at Virginia, the thing that stood out to me is like, dude was averaging almost 15 yards a catch, which is hard to do consistently over a 4 or 5 year career. Secondly, he catches the ball really well. Ball skills are outstanding. The number of catches that he makes, how acrobatic he is. And talking about Michael Pittman and using the comparison I used to Marty Toomer, it is about working over the middle of the field. It is about being that guy that can expand the strike zone for Jackson Dart. Now you have a world that we can live in where we have Malachi Fields and Malik Neighbors and Isaiah Likely and Theo Johnson, Cam Scatterby, where you have a bunch of different physical options to lean into. But yeah, his physicality is certainly going to be an asset on the perimeter, not only as a pass catcher, but in blocking the run game.
All right, now let's jump over to the Jackson Dart. In this new offensive world that we talked about, in the system and what it's going to look like, what are the biggest steps that Jackson has to take in year number 2 here, Bucky, to have success and continue to improve?
Look, I think number one thing is confidence in terms of playing the game fast, but not being out of control. John Wooden would talk about be quick, but don't hurry. So quickly working through your progressions, but not hurrying through them where you feel like, man, I got to run because everything's not there. I think as he has more confidence in the offensive scheme and as he settles into how you have to play the game, relying on his head and his arm more so than his legs, and using those legs in what we call those special situations that you see the greats using. So when you look at Josh Allen now, Josh Allen for the Buffalo Bills, he utilizes his legs in got to have his situations. Third down, red zone, 2-minute game on the line. You want Jackson Dart to evolve to that. Like, okay, third down situation, hey, I may need to run here. Red zone, we're getting close to the end zone. Inside the 10, man, I can put it down and go get it. 2-minute situation, game is on the line. Let's make a play to do it. But on some of those other situations, like when it's like, hey, the pocket's collapsing, I can run, but am I going to take a hit? Let me throw it away. Those things. So understanding how to play the game, because he has to realize the Giants need him available for all 17. So picking and choosing when to be a little bit of that daredevil, if he does that while growing as a passer, that's the version at quarterback that the Giants want to see.
If you want to know how to manage 2 minutes of crunch time football, I'm your man. But if you're wondering about a long-term financial plan, you should talk to Citizens. Hey, I can also talk lawn care.
I'd like to learn about a mowing routine.
Yes, I knew I could help.
Make sense of your money with Citizens.
All right, let's jump to defense. Colton Hood added in the draft as a corner, Bucky, and you wrote your evaluation of him, and I agree. Outside corner, really physical. You could play him in press. But I think what struck me is that you mentioned a couple times how polished you think he is. And you wouldn't think that from a guy that was at 3 different schools, really started just 1 year. What is it about what you saw from him on the field that makes you describe him as being polished?
One, I would say I'll work backwards because I had a chance to talk to him a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and I was just really impressed with the IQ and his ability to walk me through what he was asked to do. Secondly, high school baseball background. And I asked him this, like how good he was, and he talked about it, and I saw clips of him. He's a really good baseball player. I think something about the multi-sport thing can allow people to really grow as athletes, and he can lean on some of those experiences to become a much better player. And so if you think about baseball, the pitch-by-pitch mentality, the at-bat mentality that you have to have, look, as you're batting 300, you're doing really well. So think about that mindset that you also have to have at corner. Play by play, down by down. Guy gets the catch, but I go right back up and get back in the box. He has that mentality. And then when you see the toughness, the physicality, it is all there. With the football, with the footwork, the turns and transitions, he has the skill set. He has the mentality. Now it's about putting him on the field. And because I believe so much in some of the defensive coaches on that staff, I am a huge Denard Wilson fan. I can't say enough about him in terms of what he does as not only as a defensive coordinator, but as a defensive back developer. I just know that Colton Hood is going to flourish under his tutelage and direction.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on Wilson in a second. One more thing on Hood quickly. The other thing I know you've talked about too is his patience with the ball in the air. And we've seen, I think, the opposite sometimes with Deonte Banks here, right? Where the ball's in the air and he can't locate it. He grabs, he pulls, and there's flags, and he loses track of the receiver because he's trying to find the ball. You didn't see any of that with Hood, right? The ball's in the air. He gets his head around. He locates it. There's no panic. There's no grabbing. And I wonder if that has to do with baseball too, right? I'm not sure if he was an outfielder, but tracking the ball and just being very calm with the ball in the air and just playing that ball well at the catch point, which for a corner is essential.
It absolutely has all to do with baseball. He plays center field, so that means he can track it. He has great depth perception. And so there is something about one of the things, and you can ask Joe this the next time you talk about it, man, you look in people's background to see what they've done because it plays out. And so when a guy has played baseball, particularly a DB, there's not going to be a sense of panic when it comes to ball skills because he can catch it late, meaning that he can turn late and the ball is already in flight and he's like, I'm cool. It's no different than playing baseball. So for him, the ease and the poise that he shows when the ball is in the air strictly comes from playing in the outfield, knowing that he can run those things down. Those skills translate and transfer from baseball to football, and that is why I'm so confident that he will be able to get his hands on a ton of balls while he's playing on the island for the Giants.
What has you excited about Denard Wilson and what he might do schematically with his defense?
But just to look, man, having to watch him grow when he had an opportunity to call the defense at Tennessee. When you looked at Tennessee, they had nothing. I mean, they had Jeffrey Simmons, and that was about it. And he was able to make every game a very competitive, scratch it out, grind it out game. And I just know that as he continues to grow, because remember, he spent time in Baltimore with John Harbaugh. They can utilize that Baltimore defense that doesn't really give up a lot of big plays, and I would call it organized chaos. Now that he actually has pieces to play with, and we talked about those guys up front, and Kayvon and Brian Burns and Abdul Card and Arvell Reese, man, they are going to make life miserable for people with the scheming, the simulated pressures and those things. That's why I'm real excited about Denard getting to have an opportunity. And I'm going to say this personally because the linebacker coach, Frank Bush, is one of my favorites. I've known him since I was in college. Like, he is a fun guy, but I also know the personnel that they're dealing with is the right people to teach them how to play because they have a bit of that edge while also having that nuance as a great teacher. I think you're going to feel their presence on defense a little differently than you felt it previously.
Two follow-ups on defense before we say goodbye here, Bucky. One up front, you talked about the pass rush packages. Do you think this looks more like what we saw from the Giants in the Steve Spagnuolo era, where you're going to have 4 down on 3rd down, but it's going to be a bunch of really fast guys in that NASCAR package where they get a field? Or is it going to look more like maybe the Brian Flores deal, where you got a bunch of guys standing up, you don't know who's coming, who's going? Is it going to be a mix of both? What do you think those pass rush packages on, 3rd and 11, under 2 minutes to go might look like?
It's funny because they could probably do a mix of both, but I would say this. When I think about the personnel that they naturally have, to me, Abdul Carter can stand up, Brian Burns can stand up. You talk about Arvell Reese being able to stand up, and even Kayvon to a bit. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces that you can do. And then when you think about the safeties and the nickels that you can involve in the mix, I think you will see some of that creativity that you saw from Spags, where it's just like a bunch of stuff that they're just throwing at you. And once they kind of crack the code, they're going to come at you relentlessly with all kinds of pressure. I think it would be more in that mode, more so than a very static defense like, hey, our guys are better than your guys. We're going to whip you up front. I think it'll be more scheming and creativity to maximize the athleticism and the personnel that you have.
All right, and then finally, I want to ask you about the safeties, Bucky. One, because you obviously played, defensive back. That's one of your expertises. And you talk about Denard Wilson, former DB coach, right? That's what he does. When you saw him in minicamp last week, he was with the DBs for a lot of those practices.
Yeah.
The Giants have 2 very talented safeties. Javon Holland has done really good things in the league. Tyler Nubin was a really good player in college. Yeah. I would say down here for both those guys last year. I think what Wilson can get out of those 2 guys with the way he plays quarters, the safeties are so important. How do you think he can kind of get those guys back to being what they have been or are supposed to be this year for the Giants defense?
I think it comes down to challenging them and then also giving them confidence. The challenge comes from raising the standard and of the expectations that he has for the position. The confidence comes from putting them in position where they're going to make plays. And as they begin to get their hands on the ball in camp, in training camp, and preseason games, it'll lead to success in the regular season. because he played the position successfully at Maryland, because he coached the position for a long time. That's his baby. And so he's going to be very demanding of them. But I've seen him build guys up. So I'm just confident those guys are going to play better because they're going to have more opportunities. And this is what we know. The more active the front, the more plays are available in the back end. And because the pass rush can get after it, you'll see more opportunities to make plays on the ball on tips and overthrows. I think it's a mutually beneficial situation because the rush is improved. So that means the coverage will improve in the back end.
Bucky, you're awesome. Tell the folks what you have coming out that they should be keeping an eye on. And what's going on with high school football, man? You got spring practice going on. What do you got?
Yeah, high school football is kicked off in full earnest. We got spring ball coming up in a week or so. Everything is great, man. I'm still doing the stuff in a transition to NFL.com. I have my own independent podcast outside of Move the Sticks called The Bucky Brooks Show. That's on Believe. So all things, man, all things ball, I'm all on it. And I love having an opportunity to come on and chat with you about it.
And you can find them on the Move the Sticks podcast and, of course, everything NFL.com. Bucky, good stuff, my friend. We'll talk to you soon. Enjoy whatever we consider the offseason now, which really no longer exists.
All right, have fun. Appreciate you.
Appreciate it. That's Bucky Brooks and the Johnson Podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From the Hackensack Murray Hill Podcast Studio, keep getting better. We will see you next time, everybody.